You ever get that feeling? Like you can get English, read stuff, watch movies, even keep up with podcasts like this one, right? But then you want to speak it,
Yeah.
and boom, it's like hitting a wall.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
So today, we're tackling that wall using this 2-part episode of the Daily English podcast that someone sent in. Thanks for that, by the way.
A lot of good stuff in those 2 episodes.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So to kick things off, they had this analogy about learning to play the piano.
Yeah, I liked that one. They said, it's not enough to just, hear amazing music, to actually play it. You got to train your fingers, build up that muscle memory, and practice all the time.
It's so true, which makes you think, speaking a language, it's kind of physical too, right?
Absolutely. You're coordinating thoughts, your breath, even your vocal cords, making sounds you might not be used to.
It's like a workout for your mouth, basically.
Yeah. And the podcast, they point out this big trap that a lot of language learners fall into.
Oh, let me guess. Is it the translation trap?
Bingo, that habit of translating everything in your head before you even, open your mouth.
Oh, tell me about it. I'm so guilty of that. It's like my brain is running a whole separate translation program in the background while I'm trying to talk.
Exhausting. Super inefficient, too. It makes conversations all choppy and awkward. The podcast suggests trying to get this think in English.
Okay, easier said than done, though, right?
Yeah.
How do you actually make that happen?
It's about immersion, surrounding yourself with English as much as possible. Think music, movies, even switching your phone settings to English.
Oh, interesting. So even if I'm not, actively studying, just having English around in the background can help.
Exactly. It trains your ears to pick up the rhythms and the flow of English. The more you're exposed to it, the less you'll have to consciously translate.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Although, even when I do manage to, think in English, there's still that fear of messing up, which the podcast also talked about.
Yeah, it's a big hurdle for a lot of people.
Totally. Intellectually, I know. Everyone makes mistakes when they're learning something new. But it's still hard to shake off that feeling of, oh God, I sound dumb,
The podcast really stresses this idea of a growth mindset. It's think of a baby learning to walk. They're going to fall a million times.
Oh, for sure.
But they keep getting back up, learning a language. It's similar,
So instead of beating myself up over every little mistake, I got to see them as, chances to learn.
That's the idea. They even suggest recording yourself speaking English and then listening back to find areas to work on.
Ooh, that's a cool idea. Almost like having a personal language coach, but it's just me.
Totally. You can catch your own pronunciation mistakes, see where you hesitate, even analyze how you sound.
I like it. Speaking of specific techniques, they talked about shadowing. That one really caught my attention. What's that all about?
So shadowing is basically you find audio or video of a native English speaker and you try to mimic them at the same time.
So if I put on my favorite English podcast, I can try to talk along with the host.
Exactly. They recommend starting small, maybe a minute or 2 at a time. And then as you get better, you can increase the length and the difficulty.
Makes sense. I can just imagine myself trying to keep up with some super fast talker and my tongue getting all tied up in knots.
Yeah. That's why they say start small. Choose something you enjoy. And at a level that's a little challenging, but not impossible. The key is to do it regularly. Even a few minutes every day can make a big difference.
So we've got the practice analogy, like learning an instrument, then switching to thinking in English, recording yourself, and now shadowing. It's like building a whole toolkit for this speaking thing.
And then on top of all that, they talked about mastering those everyday phrases.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Like, hello, thank you, how are you? That kind of stuff.
Yep. It might seem simple, but those phrases are the foundation of conversation. Having those basic building blocks makes everything smoother.
It's like having those go-to moves you can bust out in any situation.
That's it. The podcast says, practice those phrases until they become automatic. So when you're in a conversation, you're not stuck trying to remember the right words. You can just focus on what you want to say.
I can see how that would make a huge difference, freeing up your brain to actually, have a conversation.
Right. To move beyond just the mechanics of the language. And the podcast also gets into this really fascinating thing about how our brains actually rewire themselves when we learn a new language. Ever heard of Broca's area?
Vaguely. Rings a bell. Something to do with language, right?
Yeah. It's the part of your brain that's responsible for speech production. And here's the wild part. Just understanding a language doesn't activate Broca's area in the same way as actually speaking it.
So even if I can read and understand English perfectly,
Yeah.
my brain needs specific training to actually produce spoken English.
Exactly. They have this great analogy. It's like having all the ingredients for a cake, but not knowing how to bake it.
Uh-huh. Love that. So we're basically training our brains to bake spoken English.
Yeah. But then, of course, there's that mental block that a lot of people get. You know what you want to say, but the words just won't come out.
Don't I know it?
That's the psychological side of language learning. The podcast digs into that, too. They talk about fear of judgment, being overly critical of ourselves, thinking we'll never sound good enough, all that fun stuff.
Oh, I've been there. It's like there's this little voice in my head that's constantly saying, you sound so stupid.
It's super common. But the podcast really hammers home this idea of self-compassion and that growth mindset. We got to be kinder to ourselves and just accept that mistakes are part of learning.
So it's like giving ourselves permission to not be perfect.
Right, totally. And remembering that language learning, it's a journey, not a destination. There will be ups and downs, you know. The key is just keep practicing, keep trying things, keep pushing yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone.
It's kind of inspiring to think that I can actually rewire my brain and get past these mental barriers.
Yeah, you absolutely can. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming either. They talk about this technique called chunking, which is basically breaking down sentences into smaller, more manageable bits.
So instead of saying, I would like to order a cup of coffee, please, all at once I could break it down. Like, I would like to order a cup of coffee.
Please. Exactly. You're creating little building blocks that you can then piece together. It's like building a tower out of Legos.
Makes it way less intimidating.
Right. You build confidence gradually.
Yeah.
So then the question becomes, okay, I'm practicing at home, I'm getting more comfortable, but how do I actually take this out into the real world?
Yeah, because practicing by yourself is one thing, but having actual conversations with native speakers, that's a whole other level.
Totally different ballgame. The podcast has some really good advice for this, too. They talk about finding opportunities to use English in your everyday life. Think about your hobbies, your interests. Are there any groups or activities where you could use English?
That's a good question. I love cooking. Maybe I could join a cooking class taught in English. Or I'm a big movie buff, so maybe a film discussion group.
See? Those are great examples. The key is finding natural contexts where you can practice your speaking skills in a way that's actually fun and interesting for you. And don't forget about online options, too. Ever thought about using a language exchange app?
I've heard of them, but I haven't actually tried one yet. What are they like?
It's basically a platform where you can connect with other language learners from all over the world. You find someone who's learning your native language, and you help each other practice real conversations, learning about different cultures. It's pretty cool.
That sounds amazing. I'm definitely going to check that out. This is great. We've covered so much already. We've talked about practicing those basic phrases, rewiring our brains, shadowing like a pro. It's a lot to take in.
It is. But the key takeaway here is that there are tons of tools and techniques out there. The trick is finding what works best for you and then just commit to it, you know?
That's so true. It's easy to get overwhelmed and just give up. But if we can just focus on one thing at a time and celebrate those small victories, we can actually make real progress.
You got it. It's all about enjoying the process and not getting discouraged. We'll talk more about that in the next part of our deep dive into the Daily English podcast. Stay tuned.
Definitely stay tuned, folks.
All right, so picking up where we left off, the second part of this Daily English podcast episode, it really dives into the whole mindset thing.
Ooh, the mental game.
Yeah.
That's interesting. What do they have to say about that?
Well, they make a big point about setting realistic expectations.
Yeah.
You know, language learning, it takes time.
Yeah, you're not going to become fluent overnight.
Exactly. It's like anything worth doing, right? It takes effort and consistency.
No shortcuts. You got to put in the work.
And they also talk about defining what fluency even means to you. It doesn't have to be like textbook perfection, you know?
Right. I mean, my definition of fluency for traveling is going to be totally different from someone who needs to give presentations in English for work.
Exactly. So it's about figuring out your own goals and what you want to achieve with English. And then they have this great tip about focusing on those small wins, because it's easy to get discouraged, right? When you feel like you're not progressing fast enough.
Oh, yeah, I've been there. It's like you start comparing yourself to native speakers and you're like, ugh, I'll never get there.
Totally. But the podcast says, instead of focusing on how far you have to go, try celebrating those little victories along the way.
Like what kind of little victories?
I don't know, like finally nailing that tricky pronunciation or having a conversation where you actually understood everything, or even just like getting a joke in English.
Those are good. I like that. It's like leveling up in a video game. Keeps you motivated to keep playing.
That's the idea. And they suggest keeping a language learning journal, too.
A journal. Like, Dear Diary, today I learned how to say squirrel in English.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Something like that. You can write down new words you've learned, conversations you've had, things you're proud of. It's a good way to track your progress and see how far you've come.
I actually really like that idea. I'm a big journaler anyway, so I could totally see myself doing that.
Yeah, it can be really motivating. And speaking of motivation, the podcast also talks about dealing with those inevitable setbacks and moments of discouragement.
Oh, yeah, those are the worst. You hit a wall and you're just like, why am I even doing this?
I know the feeling. But they emphasize the importance of resilience. You know? Just able to bounce back from those tough moments.
Easier said than done sometimes, though.
True, but they give some good tips, like finding a supportive community, maybe a language exchange partner, an online forum, or even a study group. Having people who understand what you're going through can make a huge difference.
Yeah, it's like having a team of cheerleaders cheering you on even when you mess up.
Exactly. And then, get this, they even suggest practicing gratitude.
Gratitude. For language learning. Now, that's a new one.
I know, right? But hear them out. They say that when we focus on what we're grateful for, it shifts our mindset. Instead of dwelling on what we're lacking, we start to appreciate what we already have.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Like, instead of being frustrated that I'm not fluent yet, I should be grateful that I even have the opportunity to learn English.
Exactly. Be grateful for the ability to connect with people from different cultures, to travel to new places, to expand your world.
Okay. Yeah, I could see how that could change your whole perspective.
Right. And when you're feeling grateful, you're more likely to be, like, patient and persistent with your learning.
Makes sense. It's like they're saying, hey, look how far you've come already. Be proud of yourself.
Exactly. Celebrate those small wins, and don't forget to appreciate the journey itself, even the messy parts.
This is good stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like you're really reframing the whole language learning experience.
They are. It's not just about memorizing grammar rules and vocabulary. It's about developing the right mindset, embracing the challenges, and ultimately finding joy in the process.
It's about the journey, not the destination.
Right. You got it. And at the end of the episode, they have this really cool call to action. They challenge listeners to pick one specific technique from the episodes that really resonated with them, and then commit to trying it out that week.
So it's not just about listening and absorbing information. It's about taking action, putting what you've learned into practice.
Exactly. Whether it's shadowing, recording yourself, finding a language exchange partner, there are concrete steps we can take to move closer to our goals.
Love it. I'm feeling inspired.
Me too. And you know what else they said? That we're not alone in this. There are millions of people all over the world learning English, facing the same challenges, celebrating the same victories.
It's a global community. That's actually really comforting, knowing that we're all in this together.
It is. And that sense of connection, it can make all the difference when you're feeling stuck or discouraged. Just remember, other people have been where you are, and they've come out the other side.
So we can too.
Absolutely. We got this.
Okay, so we covered a ton of ground in those first two parts. Practice, mindset, all those cool techniques. Is there anything else the Daily English podcast touched on that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, actually, they circled back to something they'd mentioned earlier, gratitude.
Gratitude for language learning. That seems kind of out there. I got to admit, I usually think of gratitude in terms of like health or relationships.
Yeah.
Not so much English grammar.
Right. A bit unexpected, but they make a good case for it. They say when we focus on what we're grateful for, it shifts our whole perspective, you know? We stop dwelling on what we're missing and start appreciating what we already have.
Okay, I think I see where they're going with this. So instead of beating myself up for not being fluent yet, I could try being grateful for the chance to even learn English in the first place.
Exactly. Be grateful for the chance to connect with people from different cultures, to travel to new places, to open up new possibilities.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like they're saying, hey, look at all the amazing things you can do because you're learning this language. Be excited about it.
Right. And that kind of positive energy, it can really fuel your motivation and help you stick with it, even when things get tough.
I can totally see that. It's like if you're genuinely excited about something, you're going to put more effort into it.
Yeah.
And you're going to be more forgiving of yourself when you make mistakes.
Totally. And the Daily English podcast, They even say to be grateful for those small wins, like understanding a song lyric or having a smooth conversation or noticing improvement in your pronunciation.
It's like they're saying, hey, celebrate every step of the journey, no matter how small.
Exactly. It's all about those little moments of joy and appreciating how far you've come.
Man, I'm really digging this whole gratitude angle. It's like a total reframing of how I think about language learning.
It is. It's not just about the destination. It's about finding the joy in the journey itself.
Totally agree. And at the end of the episode, they had this cool call to action. They challenged listeners to pick one technique that really stood out to them and actually try it that week.
Oh, yeah, I liked that. It's like, okay, we've given you all this information. Now go out and do something with it.
Actionable advice. Love it.
It is. Whether it's shadowing, recording yourself, finding a language exchange partner, just pick something and go for it.
Makes it less overwhelming, too.
Right, totally. Just focus on one thing at a time. Baby steps.
I'm definitely feeling inspired to step up my English game after this. This whole deep dive has been a game changer for me.
Me too. It's like a toolkit for success. And you know what? The best part is that we're not alone in this. There are millions of people all over the world learning English right now, facing the same challenges, celebrating the same victories.
Yeah, it's a global community. That's actually super encouraging to know.
It is, and that sense of connection can be really powerful, especially when you're feeling stuck or frustrated. Just remember, you're not the only one going through this. There are people out there who get it and who are rooting for you.
I love that. So, to everyone out there who's on this English learning journey with us, keep practicing, keep experimenting, and most importantly, keep believing in yourselves. You got this.
We all do.